fame.
You don't mess with Mr. Wonderful. Thank you, fans, very much. Love you all, and I love my beautiful wife, Rhonda. I'll be home, baby.
So we're going to do something a little different tonight. Normally we interview a wrestler or go behind the scenes. Tonight we're doing something totally different, and I'm so excited and honored to be a part of tonight's show. There's a lot of words I can think of to describe tonight's show, but the one that really comes to mind is this. Tonight's show is going to be wonderful because we're paying tribute to one of the greatest of all time, the one and only Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Joining us is his son, Travis Orndorff. Travis, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, Mike, I'm happy to be here, man. Just finishing off a beautiful day down in Georgia and hanging out at the house. So it's good to connect with you. We've gone back and forth for a while. So, it's a good time. It's a good time for me, and it's a good time to, to connect and talk about what's going on.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about what we're here to talk about. Your dad, what a wrestler your dad was. When you look back at just his matches alone, they'll hold up with any match today. Your dad was just, if you think of a professional wrestler, you think of the body, you think of the robe, you think of talking, you think of the personality. Your dad had it all.
For sure. But let me just go back and kind of recap what you were talking about, or what you were mentioning. So I think what really differentiated my father, and when you look at generation and why his matches still hold up, it has nothing to do with his robe, has nothing to do with his body, because Rude had a robe, Rude had a body, upper body at least. He didn't have any legs, but I suffer from that same illness. My dad said when I was a kid that the doctor gave me a no acetol, and that's why I had no legs. So. But Warrior had the body, Luger down the line. What really differentiated my father is arguably nobody was more intense in every match. I mean, he just looked like he was going to kill you. He never looked like he took a second off. And that intensity is what differentiated him back then. That's what people remember. I mean, even just him talking, people are like, man, just watching his interviews makes me nervous. Look at what my father did inside the ring with his intensity, and then you combine it with his technical knowledge of wrestling. He made each move seem there was a flow. There was almost a dance to it, but he brought, because I thought Bret Hart was one of the most technical wrestlers, but I didn't think he brought the intensity to each move that my father did. And that's not taken away. Everybody's got a different style. His was just a little more laid back. My dad just looked like he was trying to kill you all the time, even when he was a good guy. Like, I can remember whether he was a good guy or a bad, heel or babyface, whatever. When he would do a pile driver, he would grab them by the hair and ears, and he would, shake their head as he would, bring them in under. People did a pile driver, right? But nobody did that kind of just anger and just like I'm punishing you before I even do the finishing move. And the body, absolutely. I mean, that kind of sets him apart. You put all these pieces in there, but a lot of people had those other pieces, but nobody that I can think of had the level of intensity that my father did.
Tell me, what is the earliest memory you have of seeing your dad on TV? Like what era is it? The 80s, the 90s?
Of really getting to watch it. We saw it on USA Network. I think it had come on 83, 84, which would have put me, 5, 6 years old, which I mean, I don't remember, it's very, very vague. I could have dreamed it for all I know at my age. It all runs together. But I do remember going to the Omni with my mom and my brother for the pay-per-view. Well, not pay-per-view, closed circuit television for WrestleMania. And that's my first memory of actually seeing him wrestle. Now, I had been on the road with him before that, or even during those times, me and my mom would travel. So I saw him in his tights and the robes. I saw the pageantry and stuff. And I remember being in cars and people yelling at us and stuff like that. But actually watching a match, it wasn't till WrestleMania. And to be honest with you, the next time I watched a match was probably WCW. Like when I was on the road with him, I didn't watch the matches. I was back in the dressing room. The matches that I went back and watched, and some of the ones that are memorable to me, and I think my favorite has always been, from an emotional, was the cage match with Hogan. My favorite, just like technical, go at it, just, remove some of the pageant, the romanticizing, just straight wrestling match, was him and Arn Anderson. I think it was 93 Clash of the Titans. So that's my favorite individual match. But, like you said, when I go back and watch my dad's matches, there's a kind of sitting on your into your seat, a little bit of anxiety, kind of like, I don't know if I don't like heights too much or snakes. So when I see him on TV, I kind of have that, that stomach going. When I watch my dad, sometimes I'm like, dude, like, I'm hoping that guy gets up, and I know he will, but in my mind, I'm just like, that's gotta hurt. And there's things, when certain things happen, it just, I remember when Cactus Jack, would do a lot of his moves. I'm like, oh my God, I just can't imagine the bruising the next day. Right. Yeah, Dad just looked like he tore you up. I mean, I've seen people, they're breathing so hard, they're wore out, and Dad's still going. And he'll you can see them almost like, tap him to go, give me a second, just let me catch my breath. So getting to see a lot of those matches, I think WrestleMania still is so much fun. I guess I'm more of a historian. For me, I love where it's going. I don't have any problem with wrestling, but I love seeing that everything today started in that match. The people don't remember as much as I do, but Liberace, Muhammad Ali, Cyndi Lauper, Mr. T, it was, I mean, it was Super Bowl worthy.
It's what does my dad do for a living day, at school, the guy next to me is dad's a banker. This kid's dad's a doctor. My dad's Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. What was like growing up the son of Paul Orndorff?
So I think it's you have a very distorted perception of it, and I don't think it's a coincidence. As I have my own podcast. We've only done a few episodes. We're about to start back up. There's a lot of trauma that you hear from families of wrestlers. A lot of trauma. The guys are on the road. Obviously infidelity, as well as multiple other things, multiple wives and divorces and illegitimate children and fights and everything that comes with it. My dad was pretty settled, right? So that wasn't something I necessarily went through, but I was fortunate that I went to a very small private school, and I don't think it ever occurred to me that it was different, because nobody in school treated me different, and I don't think it ever got brought up. I don't, because my dad would come around, and I'm in a small private school. These are 6-year-olds. They're not watching wrestling, so it wasn't really a relevant thing to me until he left wrestling in 87 and started the bowling center. And really I would say, from WrestleMania 1 till 87, when he left WWE, I was on the road with him all the time. So I saw how people treated him there. But when we went back to Fayetteville, Georgia, we lived in a suburb. People came over and hung out with him. He went to my baseball games. Now, granted, I always tell people, no joke, he'd go in his, shortest shorts and have no shirt or pants on, just the shortest shorts. And he'd take a lawn chair from the backyard and throw it in the back of his pickup, and he would sit in the back in suntan and watch my baseball games. But, so when he was home, like, was there people asking, when we would go and play games outside of Fayette County, that, then it was different. And we went to, my dad was very involved with the Special Olympics. So when I would go to those events, I mean, I saw who he was, but it was never like that at home. Because my mom certainly didn't treat him like Mr. Wonderful. He cooked hamburgers and hot dogs, overcooked hamburgers and hot dogs, but he cooked steak on the grill, again, overcooked steak on the grill. But, we had kind of been, I had, it may not have been that many days, but there were many days it was very normal. And during school, during those years and even into, about 5th or 6th grade, when I would travel, I would get out of school and they would let me just come back as like a, this is obviously back in the early 80s. I'd come back as a, kind of a presentation about where I went that week or whatever. And so, I was up in New York for several of the events and major events that happened because they were bringing him in. They knew it was a big event. I was in the back room because those are the ones we would travel with. And I remember, in particular when we went and saw the Statue of Liberty and did all those things. And I go back and do a project. And in the meantime, I'd just been at one of the biggest wrestling events, that people were like, "Oh my God, you were there." And I'm like, "Yeah, at the Holiday Inn," it's not as sexy as you think on the road for sure. More often than not, we were in a car, a bus, or on a plane. We'd settle in. My dad would eat tuna fish out of a can with crackers and mustard, or sardines, which was wonderful in a first-class cabin. And that was the road. It was gym in the morning. Good lunch at the Omni or, wherever stadium, by 2 p.m. or so, and they're cutting promos and I'm sitting in the back in between them and they're organizing matches. He wrestles, he comes out, takes a shower, puts a towel over his head. We walk out and hide from everybody, get in the back of an ambulance, get taken down to a car and go to the next town. So wrestling from that point was non-existent. When he retired, he opened up a bowling center and then everybody that was coming was brand new. So they were coming from outside of our arena. So that was when my home got infiltrated. There was definitely times like when I got, into the 9-10, or I think I was 7 or 8, when Hogan turned and we were at like a baseball camp and then the next week in school. But who asked me about was the teachers. That was more of what it was. But when people found out my dad was famous, they immediately put me in a category. That was difficult. That was difficult to try to live up to.
Well, you talked about the injury earlier to your dad. Was that a specific event that caused that injury? Was it over the course of time? What caused your dad's injury?
So, ego, stubbornness, and no idea is the honest to God answer. Anybody that, in my opinion, anybody that speculates what caused that injury, I think would be, you'd be making an accusation you can't back up. So I will tell you, yes, I've been told it happened in a match where he was supposed to get drop kicked and he ended up getting kicked in the neck and dad was bracing for the drop kick and got, kicked in the chin and that caused it. I've never heard, I know who the wrestler is, but only a couple wrestlers have told me and they've said that same name. And dad had told me about it, but the reality was he got hurt and he went to the doctors and they recommended surgery. And at the time, you have to know what these guys came from territories into WWE. The business is different now. You leave for 6 months and you lose your spot.
Right.
these are independent contractors, 1099s. These aren't, there was no agents, that I'm aware of during those times. So
Your dad
dad
was
didn't
working
want to
with
lose
Hogan
his,
at the time, right?
yeah, dad
Yeah.
was at the peak. So dad didn't want to leave, but he was hurt. And I think he was so afraid to say to Vince, I need the time off. I think, his ego and everything that came with it. And the reality was when he could have got the surgery, this is back in the 80s. Who knows what the impact would have been? But I have to believe it would have saved him from a couple of other things that obviously the atrophy never stopped, right? So by the time he was 50, he could kind of use his right hand, but he would put, because he was ambidextrous, but he would put food in his right hand and then he would use his left hand to bring it to his mouth. So it continued down that line, but dad never had the surgery until he finally broke his neck, his spine. He didn't have that surgery to heal it, until, God, I want to say I think the first one was in 96 and the second one was after the Buffalo, which had been 2000 after the power plant. So both of those, and that was when he had his 2nd through 8th vertebrae taken out, cadaverous vertebrae, titanium rod. So the atrophy happening back in the mid 80s, the reality was dad's ego and pride would not step away because he was over. He ended up getting the Bowling Center. I think he thought that was just going to go magical. He left WWE probably too soon, and he certainly left the wrong way. He should have left saying, I'm getting surgery and doing this. And he didn't get the surgery when he left. So let me just say that.
Can I ask, why did he leave in 87? Is something you can talk about?
He was hurt. He was hurt. He was, at that time, dad would have been 37. So he wasn't 25 anymore. He came up and wrestled in the 70s, like early mid 70s, not 78 when I was born. He wrestled for the NWA title and beat Ernie Ladd a month after I was born. So that's still NWA, right? So he got over at that point in that territory, if that tells you how long he had been in it. And so I think he was 32 when he went to Vince. Hogan and Roddy, I think, were 4 to 5 years younger. I could be wrong about that, but if that's significant during those times. Roddy might be closer in age, and he left, about that time. The difference was how Roddy left. Dad just quit showing up. But I think he had trusted. He trusted an advisor. This Bowling Center was going to go amazing. He had to open the first one, had a second one, group of blah 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 blah, and it went south. And he should have stayed wrestling, and he should have resigned the right way. He should have, should have. But Dad was an emotional dude. He wasn't Roddy. He wasn't a tactician. He wasn't Hogan. He wasn't a politician. Dad, everything he did was intense, good or bad. And that was where he could, in the ring, where he could manage it, but outside the ring, it could get the best of him.
You talked about being younger and not remembering a lot. During his WCW run, you're older, you probably remember more of that run. It's amazing that your dad's had such a great run in WWF, and it's such a great run in WCW. I mean, the stuff he did with Ricky Steamboat, the TV title, the stuff he did with Paul Roma. I love Pretty Wonderful. What a great team. I met Paul Roma a couple months ago. He had so many nice things to say about your dad. Any memories of the WCW run? Because I love that run.
The good thing about WCW was most of it was in Atlanta, where we live. So I could go to the Civic Center on any given day, when they were taping or whatever. And then they would go tape down in Orlando for 3 months or 2 months down at MGM Studios. And so we would have a cabana for 2 months. I'd stay down at Disney with Dad and basically hang out around it. It was basically hanging out with my dad. But so I was at a lot of it was done in Destin and places that were within driving distance. So traveling back then, obviously I couldn't take 2 weeks off and travel while I was in high school, like I could when I was younger, and things were different then. But I got to go to a lot more shows. And the cool thing was, and I'll give you an example. So when Dad was at Power Plant, no, he was an agent. He was an agent, and I was in college. And one of my mentors at the time who had helped me, get into the school I was going to, he was a huge fan. And so it was in Birmingham. So I said to Dad, I said, hey, man, can you get my buddy a couple tickets? And he said, yeah. He said, anything else? I said, well, because he was real tight with Eric. And I said, well, he's a huge Sting fan. Do you think you could hook him up? And so there was, oh God, her name just her name just escaped me. But there was a woman that worked for WCW that was like, I mean, she ran it. I always tell people she ran
Janie
it.
Angle?
Huh?
Janie Angle?
Yeah, Janie. Yes, Janie. And Janie was my dad's buddy, and she was such a sweetheart to me. I got to spend some time with her when he was at the power plant because I could go up there, and that's where her office was. So I hung out in the office a few times. But she got him tickets, and so my buddy's sitting there, and he's like, "Oh my God, you got me, front row tickets, or third row tickets, and right on the edge where everybody's would walk in." And so I meet him like right before that, and Dad says, "Hey, Trav, Janie hooked him up." And if Dad says that, that's like, you can take it to the bank. You know what I'm saying? Like, because he doesn't care, but he was like, yeah, this is a good one. So, I go over next to him during in between matches or whatever during taping, and he's like, man, because they came through, like he was on the aisle, but they came out and in the opposite aisles, catty corner to. He was like, oh man, I wish I'd been on that side. He's like, I'm not complaining or anything. So he's a huge fan of Sting. And then so the next match comes up, and I knew I just knew something good was going to happen. And so Janie put him right where Sting dropped down. So Sting landed right next to him and leans over and pats him on the back as he's walking to the ring. And so those are some of my memories from those days at WCW, right? That was where I got, but see, for me at that point, I had embraced the fame a lot different. I think probably because it was such a different time, and people, the cat was out of the bag.
Show us the robe. Gotta see it.
All right, hold on. For the record, I'm wearing headphones because I'm half. You'd think I would have this, in a better situation.
Wow, there it is.
I can't see, so you have to tell me, are we good?
It's perfect. Yeah. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it took some work getting it back.
I'm glad you have it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. Very grateful. There was a wonderful woman named Lori out in Texas that after the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame went defunct, her and the International Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, which is new, started I think a couple years ago. They all stepped in. So a lot of the guy, and his wife basically embezzled from it or something. So got shut down. All the guy's stuff was getting, there was no idea. And gratefully, Seth up in New York, I got it pulled aside and sent. And then when I was able to find, I had to find it. I figured out where it was because he didn't know where I was and I didn't know he had it. So just through diligence and phone calls and just connecting with people through Instagram like this and building relationships, and somebody goes, hey, you should probably call this person. Got a phone number, called her. And then luckily at that point they were closing down. So I rented a storage unit for what they had not found a home for. So they were able to, locate the wrestlers and get their stuff to them because all of it was going to go. And they were telling me these horrible stories about people calling in and claiming to be a family member of these wrestlers and trying to get the stuff. So it's a vetting process, and these guys are doing it for free, protecting memorabilia that it would be lost and never seen again.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Travis, before we go, what can you tell us? I know Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. I know, the babyface, the heel. What can you tell us about the man, the father, Paul Orndorff? What can you tell us about him?
So I tell this story a lot. especially when people ask me, what's my, what's one piece of advice that is stuck with you for the rest of your life and is maybe a guiding principle behind almost all of your actions, even if they may not seem relevant or pertaining to that subject. But I've never forgotten this. So first of all, very grateful to have such an amazing father, and he wasn't always around, and I think to that extent I would never, and neither would my father, encourage anybody to choose that lifestyle if you have a family, because it was tough. My brother didn't end up as in the same position as me, and he had a different lifestyle. My dad was very young when he was born, so I don't think my father would want anybody to think, although he was proud of being Mr. Wonderful, and he was proud of his body and proud of his athleticism and all the things he accomplished, that was a choice because of lack of choices. Literally sitting on the couch with his father-in-law, my grandfather, Rossley Maxwell, and Dad had fanned out, or was done with football for whatever reason. I know his heart wasn't in it. Earl Bruce, I think, beat him down to the point where he just hated it. But I think it was Earl Bruce. I could be wrong. At Tampa. But Dad was watching television on a Saturday morning and saw wrestling, and looked at my grandfather, who worked for MetLife and had lived and worked in Germany and sold insurance there and whatnot. And my dad had sold insurance for a very short period of time and realized that wasn't going to work. But my dad's sitting there because he's living with his in-laws at this point, and he says, "I can do that." And my grandfather looks at him and says, "I'll make a phone call." And that's how my grandfather is the one who introduced him to Hiro Matsuda, and and how he got connected in Tampa was through my grandfather. That's how my dad got started in wrestling. It wasn't because of fame and fortune. That didn't exist back then. So the lifestyle he led and the path he went was because it was the only option he had, and he put his body through a lot. But the story that I'll always remember, my father was so loving. I don't believe that I've, other than maybe 2 times in my life, and I mean that sincerely, which was 2 fights we had, 2 times in my life, phone calls or even just being around him, that I can recall, that I can pinpoint and go, when I left, he didn't say I love you, and or I'm proud of you, or be careful, all those pieces of just a caring, loving, genuine, supportive father. And so we were driving to the airport, which we were always going to the airport, by the way, or it felt like it. And I was dropping him off, and there was a son dropping off his dad, and I was 13 or 14. Anyway, he hugged him and he kissed him, and he looked at me and he said, "Don't ever be too proud to love your father." And he was just so loving. And, I mean, I can remember him calling me every day. When he was home and retired, there wasn't a day that went by that we didn't talk, even if it was, "What's up, Dad? You good? All right, I love you. Bye." And that would be, because I was at work or whatever. Towards the end, obviously, as his dementia, it got to be where I had to, block the call, because it would be one after the other after the other. Obviously, that was kind of a sad point. It's funny, you quit having those first phone calls where you talk to them all the time, and you miss that, because then the random phone calls, you're like, "Man, I got to get stuff done," and then there's no phone call, and you go back to either one, right? But yeah, he was the most loving, genuine, vulnerable person with me that I've ever been around. And I 100% attribute the relationship I have with my children and the love. And I was in the car, took my son to dinner the other night, and I dropped him off at his car and he kissed me and hugged me in the car. And I thought to myself right then, man, that's because of my daddy. I have this because of who my father was to me. And he didn't have that growing up. So where the hell he got it from, I still haven't figured out. But yeah, he was so loving, and he was just as intense about his love as he was about anything. So you just got to know he had two gears on and off.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Travis. One last thing. How do you want people to remember your dad?
I think what I enjoy the most, having this legacy page where I get to interact with fans, is what I think he's already remembered as. His legacy is exactly what I would have prayed for. And I see it in the comments from fans where you can talk about his intensity, but what I would tell you is you got your money's worth every time. Not only as the wrestler, but as the man. When you met my father when he was 60 years old and he was out doing shows and signing autographs, do you know how many people have said that was the best moment of their life because of how he treated them? It had nothing to do with the autograph. He was so kind. He was so sweet. He took the time. I'll randomly hear something on the internet. Somebody will send it to me where, he ran into some wrestler that was independent that's now at AEW, and they're like, Paul Orndorff pulled me aside and was like, "You've got to commit to," and they were like, "I never forgot it." And after that, and so he was impacting people's lives with his authenticness, his one of a kind way of doing things. It's why he was a great trainer. It's why he was always a teacher. So when you see my dad's body of work, most people, they really enjoy the body of work. What they don't realize is the number of people that started working out because of seeing my father on television. That's the legacy I care about. He impacted people's lives by the way he carried himself. But he was such a genuine, loving man, and to know that his work ethic and his lifestyle, because what you saw in the match was him 24/7. That diet, that gym routine, like that didn't happen on accident. So for people to appreciate and respect that, because people talk about those matches, people remember Hogan and romanticize him because of the fame. But people talk about my dad's matches as life-changing. Like, that's the one where I was so angry or I was so happy or I couldn't. I mean, I do remember one kid, his name was Sammy. We were like 21 and like sitting there drinking a beer, and he looks over at me and goes, "Hey, man, I'm sorry." I'm like, "For what?" He's like, "Man, I hated you when we were 8 years old." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Your dad turned on Hogan." I'm like, "That's why we didn't talk until we were 8. Like, dude wouldn't talk to me until I was like 18, 19. But it took him until he was 21, half drunk, to tell me, "Yeah, I was really mad at you during, middle school." I'm like, "You never even said anything to me." Like, literally ignored me. Like, I just thought the dude hated me, funny thing. But the emotional, my dad always said he played with your emotions. The amount of emotions people were invested in my father, and the return on that investment, that even though he was a heel, he made a positive impact. That to me is the legacy that very few individuals in life can say they stood for. So his legacy for me is bigger than wrestling, and the impact he's had on myself. He didn't get me into it. I mean, I work out and I'm in pretty good shape, but he didn't get me to be, an Adonis. But there's a ton of people that became bodybuilders because of my dad's physique. And the stories I hear about towns, I got this one, where, my dad left. He was in New York, it was in, the mid 80s. and Dad was, leaving or whatever. And I guess there was some type of thing where people were signing autographs. And my dad, at the end of the matches and everything, had snuck out the back, and these kids were leaving and they didn't get an autograph or something. And they run up to my dad and they're like, Mr. Wonderful, can I get an autograph? 15, 16 years old. It's in New York. And he goes, nope, but I'll take you to dinner. And turned around, grabbed the kids, took them over to a pizza place and sat down with them. And the guy's telling me this story, he's bawling while he's telling me, right? He's like, he's asking about how I treat my parents, and that I need to honor and obey them while I'm in their household, whether I agree with them or not. And if I need help, I need to go to a counselor, and and this is the workout routine I need to do, and here's how many days, and here's how long it's going to take, and here's the diet, and you got to give up the pizza and blah blah. And my dad did this whole thing for him, sitting there having, and I would have never known that had he not told me. I mean, I saw my dad do that, for my friends, but to know he just did it randomly, that could not be more meaningful, and something that I cherish more than any robe or pair of tights or any memorabilia that you could think of.
Travis, how can people find you? How can they hear more of these stories? Can you tell us your Instagram,
so Instagram, we're at Mr. Wonderful Official, MR1DERFUR Official. And then hold on, let me find the other ones. We got a Wonderful Podcast, number 1 DERFUL Podcast. Those are the two places. If you go to the Instagram page, you can click on the profile and go to our YouTube page. Our YouTube page is the Paul Orndorff Experience. So we've been uploading all of his matches that we can find, promos, vignettes, anything that we can locate. As far back as I think the earliest we have is like something from 74, but we have matches from Italy, Japan, Guam, UWF, WWE, WCW, NWA, go down the list. And so it's starting to build up as we find them and as people share. So we're having a lot of fun.
Great. I thank you. This was a lot of fun. Hope the people got a glimpse and learned a little bit more about what all of our heroes, Mr. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man, no problem. I appreciate it, buddy. You have a great night.